session 2 or video 2 as we talk about what's called the canon of Scripture. Why is it that we have the 66 books of the Bible that we do have? Why were they chosen? Why were others excluded? And so that was the discussion or the content of our second blog that we're putting out this week. So I'll turn it over to Brendan and for some questions.
Yeah, the first question that I think will probably jump out to a lot of readers is, well, not all Bibles' canon is the same. Why do some Bibles have different canon, different arrangement of books, different selection of books than other Bibles do?
Well, largely there's 66 books in most Bibles. In a particular denomination, there are an additional 14 books that's called the Apocrypha. And those books were written in between the Old and the New Testament because there was a 400-year gap between the Old and the New Testament. And so those 14 books are written during that period of time. Most Bibles do not include those books for the reason that when Jesus came to the earth, he recognized the canon or the 39 books of the Old Testament that we currently have. Those 14 books were not recognized by the Jews at that time. They were not canon. So we recognize the books that the Jews recognized at that time. It's as simple as that. In fact, those books were not put into the canon in another denomination or into another church until about the 1500s. So, I mean, this is 1,500 years after the New Testament was written. They were added to the Old Testament. And so we don't think that their authority was established, in the correct way by the apostles and the prophets. They weren't recognized. And so because the apostles and prophets didn't recognize them in the church and the Jewish nation, people of Israel didn't recognize them, we don't either.
Okay. So you mentioned that Jesus kind of validates the Old Testament. He accepted the 39 books of the Old Testament. And the New Testament was not around when Jesus was around. So what was the process for accumulating the books of the New Testament that we have today, getting them into the canon? What was that like?
Yeah, well, of course, there was a collection of books that was recognized as authoritative. Paul could say repeatedly that what you've received from me is a command, of God. And if anybody rejects this, they're rejecting God. Paul would say that over and over. John the Apostle claimed that what he was writing, in the Gospel of John is so that people could believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. In his epistle, he said, "That's which we have seen, that's which we have touched, we proclaim to you." So they had the authority to proclaim who Jesus was. It was recognized. Even Peter called Paul's writings Scripture. So within that, there was already a recognition of what was scriptural. And so by the time as after John had passed, probably around 95 AD, there was a collection of books that was largely recognized by the church as scripture, as authoritative. These were seen as being handed down, and they were not chosen, but they were recognized as scripture. However, in probably about 150 AD, there was a group of teachers, a movement called Gnostics, and they were writing all kinds of false gospels and false letters, sometimes using apostles' names, the Gospel of Thomas, even the fake Gospel of Matthew and others. And so it became very confusing, and so there were a few books that were put into question, such as the book of Hebrews, Revelation, Jude, 2 Peter. And so people had to distinguish between these false writings and some of these that weren't quite as clear as, say, the writings of Paul, his 14 letters, or the Gospels, which were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which were fully recognized. And so there's a process that the church had to go through of debating and kind of sifting about 5 different books from all of the other false ones. And you have to realize that Christianity was a movement that spanned, goodness gracious, several millions, or at least 1.5 million square miles or something. It was 3 continents, rapid movement, millions of people. And so the church had to authoritatively establish which were the books of the New Testament. And this is miraculous that they were able to do that. And so by the late 300s, the church as a whole largely came into agreement that the 27 books that we have of the New Testament were the official scriptures. But there were only about 5 of them that were kind of in contention or questioned. But that is pretty significant in terms of its near miraculous ability that the church could decipher that and make that clear in light of all of the confusion with the false letters and the false gospels that were going around. But since that time, there's been universal agreement that the 27 books of the New Testament are final canon and authority of Scripture.
All right. And I want to keep talking about the 27 books of the New Testament for a moment. So the New Testament contains within it many great famous Christian leaders from Paul to Peter, everywhere in between, but it all comes back to Jesus. And the question is, how does the New Testament reflect the supremacy of Jesus Christ?
Well, I think it's not just the New Testament, but the whole Bible. And this is very vital in terms of formulating what is Scripture. And that is, when you think of the Old Testament, think of it like a telescope. And, Moses began writing the first parts from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so in the Old Testament, they were looking ahead, like looking forward through a telescope, looking for the Messiah to come. In the New Testament, Jesus has come, and they're just glancing over their shoulders. And so the New Testament was written in a period of about 60 years, to where the Old Testament was written in about a period of 1,400
took
years.
a lot longer.
And that's because once Jesus had came, they just simply needed to look back over their shoulders and say, this is who Jesus was. This is what he did. This is how we live for him. And so as Jesus in Luke 24, and Jesus was on the road to Emmaus with a couple of people who are walking, and he explained to them, starting with Moses and the prophets, how all of the Scripture pointed to him. And so he is central to what we determine to be the canon.
All right. And why don't we add to the canon today? Why is it complete now at 66 books? Why not keep adding?
The only people that had the authority to write about Jesus or to write truth were the apostles that Jesus appointed, or those that the apostles had worked with and gave authority to write. So, for example, Mark was a close associate of Peter, and it's generally believed that the Gospel of Mark, he wrote down all the information Peter gave. And only those who walked with Jesus, saw Jesus, knew Jesus, had the authority to write in the New Testament, just as in the Old Testament, only the prophets had the authority to write. And once John, the final apostle, had passed away on the island of Patmos in about 95 AD, that's when the canon ended. And because of that, we do not believe, we totally reject anybody who says they've got a new revelation or a new prophecy or a new scripture that reflects who Jesus is or something that is new and different. That's simply not the case. We only believe in the Jesus who the apostles walked with and were given the authority to proclaim and write and teach who he was.
Otherwise, there'd be an ongoing nightmare, constantly having to sift through what is and isn't Scripture.
It would be a horrible nightmare, yes. Yes, indeed. So.
All right, the canonicity of the Bible. That's all the questions I got for you.
All right.
Thank you for joining Anthony and I today on the Biblical Story video series. Please subscribe to the Crossroads CCO YouTube channel, like, and share this video. Until next time.